We're live.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy that so many of you have taken time out of your busy schedules to join us and listen to us. And most of all, of course, your speaker, Alexei, talk about all things low and no alcohol. I think all these low and no alcohol beers and drinks in general are becoming more and more crucial for every brewery to have in their lineup. For years, you could get away with just having a bunch of IPAs. Then your IPAs had to become hazy all of a sudden. You could get away with doing mostly imperial stouts. You could get, and all of a sudden, everyone had to have a lager back in their portfolio. Now, I think in order to be successful as a brewery, you do need to have something to cater to the drivers, to the ones that just don't like getting wasted every day, to your casual drinkers. And this is exactly why we're all here today, to get a little bit of a closer overview and maybe some inspiration and ideas on how to best wrangle your yeast and hops and malt into something that is still an extremely delicious beer, but without the added benefit or downside, depending on the view, of being full of alcohol. And in order to do that, again, the floor is yours, our dear friend Alexei from Lallemand.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauri, for the introduction. Let me just share my screen. I hope it's going to work fine. Please tell me if you can see. Yes?
While you're doing that, I just want to lay down some really quick ground rules. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout. Now, I will be keeping an eye on these questions as well. And if it's something that's very suitable to interrupt Alexei, I will trust you, me. I will have no issues with interrupting Alexei. Otherwise, we will just get to all of your questions, which will hopefully be very many. We'll get to them after the presentation is done. And now back to you.
Okay, so I hope you can see the screen. Please confirm that. Lauri, can you see it?
All good.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So today we are going to talk about low and non-alcoholic beer, or how it's being called, NABLAB. So as Lauri already mentioned, this segment of beer has been growing rapidly lately, and it's projected to be worth around 45 billion by 2025. And this is primarily to people trying to reduce their alcohol consumption and just choosing healthier alternatives. And many breweries are now introducing at least one or more non-alcoholic beers into their regular range of beers. And these beers are not just limited to lagers or lager-like beers. It could also be wheat beers with, let's say, some dark styles, maybe even styles traditionally belonging to craft segment, like pale ale or Berliner Weiss, for instance. So what's actually NAB and what's LAB? So non-alcoholic beers, or NAB, is one with no more than 0.5% ABV. In some countries, the requirements are more strict, and the level of alcohol will be only around 0.05%. But for most countries, I would say the limit is just 0.5. As for low alcoholic beer, those are ones with a level of ABV around 0.5 to 1.5% ABV. Let's look at two fundamentally different groups of methods of NABLAB production. So first of all, we have physical methods, which involve the production of regular beer from which the alcohol will be further removed. So that's the main idea here. Thermal processes like vacuum distillation can be used for this purpose, for instance. In this case, the beer is being heated, and thanks to that, the alcohol is vaporized and basically being removed from the beer. Or membrane processes like dialysis or reverse osmosis. And the equipment used for this, as the name makes clear, is based on usage of semi-permeable membranes through which the alcohol is removed from the beer and passes into another medium. What are advantages of these methods? Well, first of all, it's possible to precisely control the level of alcohol in your beer. And basically, you can really bring the alcohol content to 0%. Secondly, since beer fermentation takes place as usual, there are much less or even no of flavors based on the fermentation. So this means that the beer is cleaner in terms of aromatics. But what are the downsides of these methods? Well, yes, they are probably the most progressive, but even they have a number of drawbacks. Well, since thermal methods involve heating, it's possible to lose not only alcohol, but also some positive flavor. Let's say hop oils, for instance, if you're trying to make some hoppy styles of beer. There is additional energy consumption. The thermal load on the beer may cause a change in its color. What else? Yeah, additional licenses. In other words, the appearance of rectification unit might cause some questions from regulatory authorities, like what are you actually going to do with all this alcohol you separate from the beer? And the most important disadvantage, if I can say so, this equipment is extremely expensive. And then we have the second group of biological methods. They include preventing or limiting the initial formation of alcohol. So these methods include interrupted fermentation or contact with the cold wort. So the second one is probably the most popular method nowadays. But first case, we are trying to stop the fermentation before a significant amount of alcohol has built in the beer. It's not necessary to create, uncomfortable conditions for the yeast in this case. For instance, our colleagues once conducted an interesting experiment. They fermented non-alcoholic beer with quake yeast. So this is Norwegian yeast that ferments at higher temperatures up to 40 degrees Celsius. And they stopped the fermentation after approximately 6 hours. So let's say some express method, if I may say so. So in case of contact of yeast with a cold wort, yeast, usually lager yeast, they pitched at extremely low temperatures, around 2 to 6 degrees Celsius, and they carry out some kind of fermentation in 1 or 2 days. Another option, of course, for producing non-alcoholic beer is to use strains that doesn't ferment maltotrioles or even maltose. The use of these strains reduces the amount of alcohol produced as it is. These methods are much more accessible than physical because no additional equipment is required, except for a cooling machine is supposed to cool down your wort up to 2 degrees Celsius. And, which sometimes a bit difficult, and it takes me back to my brewing days. We had some issues with that. We couldn't even lower the temperature of the wort up to 10 degrees Celsius for lager fermentations. So if you're trying to cool down your wort to 2 degrees Celsius, it might be challenging. But in other cases, you don't need anything. At the same time, there are a lot of drawbacks to these methods. First of all, we get a beer which basically is sweet. So this beer is essentially just under fermented. We have a lot of sugars, and because of that, we have this pretty pronounced sweet flavor. To a greater or lesser extent, there will be this specific wort flavor in the beer. And I must say that this is the main and the general flaw of the beer produced with biological methods. So very specific flavor of wort will be in your beer. We'll talk about it later, of course. We have a few slides about that. So constant control of the fermentation is required, since the fermentation must be stopped at the certain point. Otherwise, there is a risk of over fermentation, and basically you might go beyond the limits of non-alcoholic beers. And for the same reason, it's difficult to achieve consistency from batch to batch, especially if you don't have night shifts and you came to the brewery early in the morning realizing that your beer has already over fermented. That's a huge problem. Strains that won't utilize maltose are often not Saccharomyces cerevisiae and can sometimes be POF positive, so they will produce these phenolic flavors, which again is not a very good thing for at least some beer styles. So since most of us don't have this fancy alcohol removing equipment, we are going to talk about the biological method. And the method we recommend implies a comprehensive approach to the production of NABLAB. And we'll take a closer look at the three main aspects of this process, and those are wort production, beer fermentation, and the final one is stabilization of the final product. So we'll start with the mashing. First of all, let's remember the composition of standard wort. We have monosaccharides such as glucose and fructose, which together makes about 10 to 15%. Then we have maltose, the main sugar of beer wort, obviously. It's about 50 to 60%, followed by 15 to 20% of maltotriose. And finally, we have dextrins. So depending on the yeast type we use, the attenuation can be from 75 to around 95% if we are using diastaticus yeast, for example. So is it possible to change the attenuation of the wort? The obvious answer is yes. So starch is hydrolyzed by two main enzymes, beta amylase and alpha amylase, which produces maltose and glucose and dextrins. So they work together, cutting starch molecules. Beta amylase will produce maltose, obviously, and alpha amylase will cut starch molecule in random places, making more complex sugars. So when we producing standard wort, we tend to mash the wort at temperature most comfortable for both of these enzymes, which works together to make the wort with maximum attenuation. If we shift this temperature to higher, let's say to the higher end, we can make the situation when beta amylase won't be active anymore, but alpha amylase will still be active at some degree. So basically, we are trying to make less glucose and maltose and produce more maltotriose and dextrins. So first of all, we create less fermentable sugars, which will affect the attenuation of the wort. And secondly, we are reducing the sweetness of the wort and the final beer, because these more complex sugars, they have less sweetness. So we've done a number of tests trying to determine the optimal mashing temperature. And the idea, as we discussed, is to find conditions when beta amylase is almost inactive and the alpha amylase still has some activity. So we conducted a series of single pause mashings or on special equipment. Basically, it's some kind of insulated chambers where we could perform this single infusion mashing. And we've done it with 5 different temperatures, for starting with 74 and up to 95 degrees Celsius. And we held this temperature for different times, starting with 16 minutes and up to 19 minutes. Well, first of all, let me point out that the duration of mashing in this test played insignificant role. And as practice shows, mashing can be much, much shorter. Much more important in this case was the temperature. So at 74 degrees Celsius, iodine test passed without any darkening. So that means that the starch was fully hydrolyzed to simple sugars. At temperatures more than 82 degrees, we can see that the color changed to almost black. So that means that we have a lot of complex sugars, dextrin in particular. So mashing at these temperatures might cause some issues with colloidal stability, because this starch might cause, haziness in the beer. So therefore, two ranges can be considered optimal in this case. 72 to 74 degrees. In this case, we get more complex sugars, but the iodine test, again, will pass. So which means we won't have any issues with colloidal haze. And the second range is 74 to 76 for very, very well-modified malt. What else we should pay attention to when making wort? Well, first of all, salts. Adding enough calcium chloride will contribute to more rounded beer body. And it's not about calcium, it's more about like chloride ions that really matter. So the same concept as with New England IPAs, when we are trying to add more calcium chloride to just round the flavor of the beer so it won't be so watery. You need to use a reasonably well-modified malt, ideally. So in the simplest terms, since we start mashing immediately at temperatures over 70 degrees Celsius, it's obvious that we are skipping the protein and beta-glucan test, and we want to make sure, we want to believe that the starch is no longer bound. So if your malt isn't the best quality and you have to start with lower temperatures at maybe 52 degrees Celsius, if you are aware that your malt has a lot of protein, for instance, so start at that temperature and then go straight to 72. But keep in mind that even with a good heat exchange, even if your wort is heating up as it should be, as it mentioned in books, like 1 degree in 1 minute, you still gonna pass this temperatures more comfortable for beta amylase, and that will affect the final attenuation of the wort. If you want to, again, if you want to decrease the attenuation of your wort, of the beer, and add some flavor notes to the final product, you can use small amount of caramel or black malt. Yes, again, just to increase the proportion of these unfermented sugars. If you want to increase the body of the beer without affecting its color, you can use dextrin malt. That's another interesting option. The next important point is the optimum gravity of the beer. So a safe range for non-alcoholic beers is, again, if you want to stay within this 0.5% ABV range. So the wort gravity should be between 5 and 7 degrees Plato. Maybe a little more, up to 8, again, depending on the meshing regime you used and the raw materials you used. So the idea behind that is that with the same percentage of fermentable sugars, a higher gravity will obviously result in higher alcohol content in the final product. So staying in this range will give you not more than 0.5% ABV, and your beer will be actually non-alcoholic. And try to avoid excessive sparging water. So if you're trying to, let's say, held to the lower end of original gravity, closer to 5, maybe sometimes it's better to just add additional water to the pre-boil wort instead of washing out tannins and other compounds that at the end would just make your beer worse. We have one product that works perfectly with NABLAB. It's called ISY Enhance, and it's basically a specific yeast alphylizate containing monoprotein fraction that contributes to the beer flavor and mouthfeel, the body of the beer in particular. So what's great about this product is it came from yeast. So just yeast, and you're not adding anything that wasn't supposed to be in your final product. It's not expensive, and it's a perfect alternative to lactose or maltodextrin if you use them. Basically, it can reduce some harsh hop flavors in your beer and, again, add balance to your product. And that's why this thing is a wonderful solution for hoppy styles. As for today's topic, ISY Enhance can really increase the perception of body of the beer, of low gravity beers, so they won't seem that watery. Then hops. So first of all, it's not recommended to add a lot of hops for bitterness. Otherwise, the beer will be unbalanced. With lack of alcohol and initial low gravity, it will be especially noticeable. And if it comes to dry hopping, it's important to take into consideration such thing as hop creep phenomenon. So it's a big separate topic, and there are whole speeches devoted to it. But this phenomenon is especially important in terms of non-alcoholic beer production, because basically, let's remember what it is. Like it's there is evidence that hops contain in them and on them some amylolytic enzymes, and if dextrins are present in the wort, and we have a lot of them in non-alcoholic beers, their hydrolysis can occur and release additional fermentable sugars. And if for standard beers, the problem is some loss of the body of the beer and possible off flavors like diacetyl, for instance, with non-alcoholic beers, it's even bigger problem because it can stop being non-alcoholic. So using the best practices to prevent hop creep is more than welcome here. What can reduce the hop creep effect? Well, first of all, it's possible to add, if it's possible to add. Okay, I'm talking too much already. Sorry for that. So first of all, if it's possible for you to add hops on the hot side, please do that. If it's kettle or whirlpool, that's the best option. If hops are added at the fermentation vessel, it's better to use hop extracts or type 45 pellets. They can be called differently, cryo hop or some other varieties, but the thing is, it's more concentrated pellets, if I may say so, which have a positive effect in terms of aroma, flavor, but have less amylolytic potential. Therefore, it's worth replacing some of regular pellets with these ones. It's not necessary to keep the beer on hops for too long, and it's better to add hops at lower temperatures. Basically, don't add too much hops because, again, it will increase the potential of hop creep. And basically, procedures that will remove or inactivate yeast, I'm, of course, speaking about filtration and pasteurization, will prevent basically from this fermentation that might occur in case you will get these additional fermentable sugars. Now, let's discuss such an important point as pH adjustment. So why it's so important in NABLAB? Since low gravity wort has lower buffer capacity, it might have higher pH levels than usual. In addition to that, yeast won't produce so much organic acids during fermentation for a significant drop in pH. And that might lead to astringent worts, harsh bitterness, possible growth of pathogenic microorganisms. And that's why reaching a desirable pH level falls on the shoulders of brewers. So at the stage of mashing and lothering, there is really nothing new I can tell you. Just maintain the standard values of 5.2. What is different for NABLAB, the pH after boil should be corrected not to standard 5.1, 5.3, but a bit lower, somewhere between 4.4 to 4.6. In this case, with a slight decrease of pH during fermentation, you will basically get this desirable pH of the final product around 4.1 or even less than that. So you can use different varieties of food grade acids like citric or lactic, and at some degree these acids will be, an additional raw material, adding some slight notes of flavor to the final product. But there is also another option for lowering the pH, and that's lactic acid bacteria. So their use is a good alternative not only to lower the pH of the wort, but also to reduce the level of fermentable sugars. Because after all, some of those glucose will be used to synthesize lactic acid instead of alcohol. So just keep in mind that with lower gravity of the wort, acidification might happen overnight. So be aware unless you were trying to make non-alcoholic sour, which is a great beer, by the way. As I've already mentioned, the main flaw of beers made using biological methods is multi-flavor. And the reason for this specific flavor is aldehydes. So they are formed during mashing and boiling stage of the wort. And they have different aromas, but the words like grainy, malty will be in description of the aroma of vast majority of these compounds. During normal fermentation, these aldehydes will be reduced to their alcohols, so you wouldn't feel this specific flavor in the regular beer. But in terms of arrested or restricted fermentations, this doesn't happen at some degree. So getting rid of these off flavors before the fermentation has even started is basically a good idea. And prolonged and active boiling will allow you to get rid, at least partially, from these flavors in the final product. Well, and again, later on, it will be quite difficult to get rid of these off flavors. So trying to reduce it even before the fermentation is a good idea. And now we'll talk about the next big block, and that's fermentation. And the choice of yeast strain in our today's topic is considered from the point of which sugars can be fermented by them. And the first group of strains that can ferment basically every sugar in the wort, no matter which one, is diastaticus yeast. So we are just remembering what it is, because this is the worst choice for NABLAB production, of course, because they can ferment each of those sugars and even continue fermentation in the final bottle or can. So again, not the very best idea. Then we have probably the largest group of yeast which can ferment all standard sugars of the wort, starting with glucose up to maltose and maltotriose. Both lager and ale yeast can be used depending on the method that is being used for NABLAB production. Again, remembering lager yeast might be used for contact with the cold wort, and ale yeast might be used for arrested fermentations. We've already discussed drawbacks of these methods, but again, a lot of brewers still use them, so it was worth mentioning. Then we can choose yeast that won't ferment maltotriose. Rather large number of strains with a medium degree of attenuation has this trait, and in particular, it's very common for English ale strains. Combined with high gravity fermentations, not high gravity, I'm sorry, high temperature meshing. We've already covered today. This yeast is a perfect option for not only low alcohol beers, but non-alcoholic beers as well. And finally, we have maltose negative yeast, the ones that won't ferment anything but simple sugars like glucose and fructose. And now that we've covered some basics, let's take a closer look at the yeast options we are proud to offer for this specific application. And we have two strains in our portfolio, that's LoNa and Windsor. And keeping the chronological and logical order, let's speak about Windsor first. So that's one of the oldest yeast strains in our collection. That is traditional English ale yeast with slightly fruity estery flavor, fermenting at quite standard conditions, temperature around 25 degrees Celsius, with alcohol tolerance up to 12% ABV. What makes it special in today's discussion is that this yeast won't ferment maltotriose. So that means that degree of attenuation will be lower automatically by 10 to 15%. So again, please let me repeat myself. With a combination with a higher temperature meshing, it can result in even lower attenuation than mentioned here on the slide. The yeast work perfectly with low alcoholic beer. Can also be used for a non-alcoholic beer. It ferments rapidly, and usually fermentation ends in 3 to 4 days. With NABLAB, it will take even less than that. And then we have LoNa. So we launched this yeast last year. This is the second hybrid in our collection, which means it was bred, not just found in nature. What's interesting is that all of its parental strains and the yeast itself are Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So they won't ferment anything but simple sugars. That means that with the standard ale yeast conditions, again, standard pitching rates, standard fermentation temperatures around 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, the attenuation will be around 15 to 20%, or even lower if you combine it with the higher temperature meshing. In some of our trials, we saw attenuation lower than 10%, so which is quite impressive, I think. So the fermentation is rapid compared to some maltose negative species that are on the market, and usually it takes around 3 days, around that. In my practice, I met fermentations that took overnight. Again, quite rapid. And it's important to mention here that there is no need to hold your beer on the fermentation temperature longer than it should be. So just make sure that the fermentation actually stopped, so the gravity won't change for approximately 24 hours, and then immediately crush cool the beer to +1 degree Celsius. By the way, I think it's quite obvious, but again, I have to say that the cold storage temperature for non-alcoholic beers shouldn't be 0 or -1 as it's usual, because it doesn't have any alcohol in it. So it will probably and basically most definitely freeze at these temperatures. So +1 for cold storage is more than okay. So yeah, coming back to the previous statement, like cooling the beer as soon as fermentation is over is essential to prevent spoilage and possible fermentation that might occur even if you cross-contaminate this beer with your regular beer. So again, with non-alcoholic beers, even your regular beer, your regular yeast is dangerous, because you might go beyond the level of non-alcoholic beers. And please keep in mind that it's a very good idea to clean and sanitize your equipment with extreme cruelty. So if you are trying to pitch yeast that won't ferment any other sugars but glucose and fructose, so you are trying to prevent any type of contamination, even with your other culture yeast. LoNa has neutral profile without any phenolic flavors, and basically it makes it the perfect solution for any beer style possible you can imagine and you can brew without any alcohol. And another interesting trait of this strain, that thanks to the breeding process, it doesn't produce sulfur compounds such as H2S. And perhaps most importantly, this strain successfully reduces a significant part of Wort's aldehydes. Not all of them, of course, but the significant part, which makes its this specific malty flavor less noticeable and makes your beer more beer-like, if I may say so. Again, whatever strain or method you use, it's important to remember about stabilization. And that's probably the most underrated factor, which, of course, is very risky, not only in terms of contamination and product spoilage, but also in terms of re-fermentation and additional alcohol. And it's not a question of yeast, really. So it's just the attribute of non-alcoholic beer in principle. And regular beer is microbiology stable for a number of reasons. So, like, first of all, there are almost no nutrients in beer. The yeast consumes everything except dextrins. The alcohol itself suppresses microorganisms to some extent. Low pH and hop bitter acids, which can be quite abundant if we consider IPA, for instance, they will also suppress pathogenic microorganisms. In low or non-alcoholic beers, all of these factors will be different to some degree. Therefore, stabilization is extremely important, and undeniably the gold standard for stabilization of non-alcoholic beer is tunnel pasteurization, because it ensures sterility not only for the product itself, but also for the final packaging. Then we have flash pasteurization, which is more, let's say, gentle on beer, but doesn't exclude contamination that might happen, that might come with the final packaging, like bottles or cans. So it's worth considering, their treatment. And for pasteurization of low alcoholic beer, it's recommended about 40 to 60 pasteurization units. And for non-alcoholic beers, it should be around 80 to 120. Of course, breweries that don't have the ability to pasteurize beer, some small producers, they will use preservatives like sorbates, benzoates, or treat beer with sulfur oxides, but we don't recommend it. The better option would be, asking your colleagues with a pasteurizer to rent this necessary equipment. Yes, it's going to cost you. Yes, it's not very convenient because you need to send your beers somewhere else. But you will prevent possible gashing, possible issues with authorities if it goes over 0.5 ABV while the beer in the final package. And first of all, the most important, you will be sure that your product will be safe for the final customer. So let's run through key points of our topic today once more. Low and non-alcoholic beers can be produced using different methods. Biological methods are more accessible since they don't need any additional extremely costly equipment. A comprehensive approach to the production of non-alcoholic beers is required. High mashing temperatures reduce the amount of fermentable sugars, and in combination with it, using specific strains that won't ferment maltose or maltotriose will reduce the percentage of the final alcohol in the beer. Basically, in any case, it's necessary to remember about stabilization of the final product. It's essential to prevent re-fermentation and spoilage. And that's basically it. So thanks a lot for your attention. I hope it was interesting and useful information. If you have any questions, please contact me via WhatsApp or email. And of course, any products that we mentioned today, you can find at our official distributor, Baltic Brewing Supplies. And again, if you have any questions, just let me know. And now let me just hide my presentation. And if you have any questions right now, we can try to answer them.
So I also just wanted to say that this was short and sweet. And if you're in need of any of these yeasts or your well-modified malts, we're the guys. Just let us know. We do have one question here at the moment, which reads that, what about using rye and oats for body? How does it behave in high temperature mashing? Has this been tested?
Well, we haven't tried it. The test I showed was with this base malt without any dextrins or anything like that. But the concept is pretty much the same. You would add anything that will increase the body with additional proteins, like with oats, for instance. Of course, you want get all your starch hydrolyzed, because again, let's remember that oat flakes, they contain a lot of beta glucans, so some of that starch will be held by these compounds, but what you can get from these raw materials will stay in the beer and will contribute to the body. So yeah, it's a good idea to use oats as well.
Awesome. So we have another question, and this comes from Riga, from our friend Ugis, and he's asking, what IBU target should we? What IBU target should be best for non-alcoholic beers to keep the balance and not to be overly bitter?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think it depends on the style, first of all, you're trying to make. Because if you're making fruity sour or, I don't know, wheat beer, even with the standard beer, it will be around 10 to 15 IBU, not more than that. So maybe keeping your bitterness in that range will be a good idea. If we speak about IPAs or pale ale, when we are trying to achieve 30 to 50 IBUs with the standard beer, I would keep it to a lower end, maybe again 20 to 30, because with the low gravity worts, it will be quite obvious. It will be just too bitter. But it's a very personal thing. If you like it this way, just do it. I saw non-alcoholic beers with 50, 60, 70%, 70 IBUs. Well, if you like it, okay, but it might be just unbalanced. So if we look at BGCP and for standard pale ale set, let's say 30 to 50, stick to 30 to the lower end, and you'll be in the safe range.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't see any further questions pop up on my screen here. Okay, I'll take that back. Question about reducing worthy aldehydes by boiling. How long should the boil be to really make an impact?
At least 60 minutes, the standard time, but you can prolong it up to 90 easily. Again, I have one example. So they are trying to make quite dense first wort, and they are not trying to add additional laundering water to the final kettle volume. So they are just they collect this first wort, maybe the second one, and then they just top it up with regular water. And the pre-boil wort became a little bit, low gravity. So they try to increase the gravity of this wort by boiling it with 90 minutes to almost 2 hours. So first of all, they reduce the amount of these aldehydes, and they just reach this original gravity of the wort. So maybe it's a good option as well. Yeah.
So, anyone else with any questions? Now's your chance. Or also, actually, later is your chance as well, because you can always get in touch with Alexei or myself, and we can surely figure it out.
Yep.
But I don't see any new ones popping up at the moment.
Quite crowd.
Well, then I'd say this was short and sweet, very informative and very interesting. Thank you, Alexei.
I hope so. Thank you.
And I hope that our local markets here will soon be flooded with really nice, delicious alcohol-free beers. Because
it should be, obviously.
Let's be honest, who wants these 11% quadruple IPAs anymore? Not me. No offense.
Well, it's a separate topic. We won't touch it now.
we'll get into that one.
Yeah, later.
Awesome. So, with all of that said, thank you again, Alexei. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Took time out of their busy day to listen in, and of course, this will be on YouTube later on as well. So. Yeah. Even if you missed something or you had to go grab another cup of coffee or something in the meanwhile, you can always check the Lallemand Brewing YouTube page to check it out later and share it with your friends if you so choose to.
Yeah.
Awesome. Then I thank you all and have a nice day.
Thank you, guys. Bye.